And the question is the role of religion meant to be divisive or a source of reconciliation? Indeed, the Latin root of the word religion means to bind together. In his book, Faith and Politics, former Republican Senator John Danforth describes one role that religion plays in our nation's capital. He writes, "At 8 o'clock each Wednesday morning, a dozen or so senators gather in an interior room on the first floor of the United States Capitol for the weekly prayer breakfast. It's an intimate hour together with no public or media presence. The senators are Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives. Some are regular in their attendance, others come only occasionally. After breakfast, the leader for the day's meeting, who was chosen the previous week, speaks for about 5 to 10 minutes on a subject of his or her choosing. Then opens this discussion up to other senators. At the end of the hour, the leaders ask a colleague to say a prayer. Senators who attend the Wednesday breakfast are from a variety of religious traditions, and so the discussions are neither narrowly sectarian or heavily theological. Instead, they tend to be quite personal, touching on the life experiences of the sort that bind diverse senators together. Topics that Danforth has spoken on include the physical exhaustion of demanding work and the embarrassment of being wrong. He writes, because they are common to everyone, certainly to all members of the Senate, feelings of exhaustion and embarrassment are the kinds of subjects appropriate for discussion at a prayer breakfast. Not discussed at these meetings are the contentious issues of the day, where members are divided by party or political philosophy or regional interests. Fighting among one another over the issues is the everyday life of a senator. An hour after leaving the prayer breakfast, members will be in committee meetings wrangling about taxes or spending or how to confront terrorism. Politics is contentious, he tells us. But for a brief time each week, religion brings otherwise combative senators together. As demonstrated by the Senate prayer breakfast, religion has the capacity to bring people together across differences for common purpose, to recognize in each other's eyes the common humanity. But it can also be a powerful force that drives people apart. And Danforth says, in recent times, its interjection into politics has made religion a divisive force in our national life. But religion in America does not have to play that role. Religion is meant to bring us together, to share our humanity on this walk through the world. I think about the way that church brings people together across this church, how this church brings people together across a wide span of theological perspectives. Every Sunday there are people in the pews who are agnostics, theists, deists, Buddhists, Jews, naturalists, mystics, and just about every perspective we could think of. Yet, even though we disagree over the nature of God or prayer or the afterlife, we sing together, we eat together, and we build our world together. Whether we realize it or not, each week in this sanctuary, we represent an example of human reconciliation and understanding that could one day change the world. Lord knows the world needs powerful examples of people uniting beyond their religious differences. Imagine the state of world affairs if religious belief were not a source of conflict in our world. Imagine if people could sit together, sing together, and work together and truly love each other, regardless of their beliefs about God. We see religion playing this kind of role, not just in this church, but in other churches. I'm always fascinated to visit Trinity Episcopal Church downtown and see a homeless person sitting side by side in the pews with a woman with a beautiful mink coat. Or visiting the Church of the Restoration on Greenwood and seeing people worshiping together from North Tulsa and South Tulsa together worshiping, studying, and working together for their community. In fact, if this church, if All Souls, were to identify itself with one political party, it would be an enormous mistake. And we would alienate many of our brothers and sisters of faith. Unfortunately, however, one political party in America in recent decades has hitched its star to one particularly narrow religious perspective known as the religious right. And doing so has hurt both the party and the church. The party has lost the support of those people who would agree and do agree on many of the core issues of the Republicans and how they approach national security, economic development, and a smaller role for the federal government. Because the use of wedge issues and pandering have caused many moderates to leave the party. And it hurts the church because the church comes to be seen, rightfully so, as a source of division and judgment rather than a source of reconciliation and love, which turns people away. The heart of the evangelical religious mission is to bring people closer to God in Christ. Instead, the way that evangelical political activists are bringing their faith to bear in politics has made many people view the church as both hypocritical and political, rather than as a place of hope and as an alternative to political bickering. And the political party gets hurt as it finds itself compromising its core tenets in order to appease a core constituency. For the grossest possible example, we just need to remember the Terri Schiavo debacle. For 15 years, she had been in a persistent vegetative state due to suffering severe oxygen loss in her brain at the age of 26. For 15 years. And her husband testified that she did not want to be kept alive in that condition through artificial means. And the Florida court eventually ordered the removal of her life support. And we know now, due to the autopsy reports, that her brain had shrunk to half of its size, and indeed, she was in a permanent vegetative state. But seeing a video of her before she died caused religious groups to cry out, they're murdering her. And Christian conservatives sprung into action in Florida and in Washington, D.C., and Republican politicians responded by abandoning their core principles in order to appease the religious base. The Florida legislature, for example, quickly wrote a law that only applied to Terri Schiavo. They wrote a law that applied to one person, allowing Governor Jeb Bush to prevent the withholding of nutrition and hydration. Then the U.S. Congress quickly passed a legislation that conferred federal jurisdiction on what had rightfully been a state judicial matter. And on Palm Sunday of 2005, President Bush flew on Air Force One from his ranch in Texas to Washington just for the purpose of signing that legislation. Fortunately, the federal judges, who do not need to pander to an electoral base, quickly denied the reinsertion of the feeding tubes. These judges, just like the judges in Florida, knew that this whole affair was a political farce. The Republican politicians who were involved claimed to be taking a principled stand, when in fact they were abandoning their principles. Prior to the recent climate of evangelical activism, it was the Republican Party that sponsored the Patient Self-Determination Act in the Senate, which since 1990 gives patients the right to refuse treatment. Back then, they brought in Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish representatives who spoke to Congress to explain that their faiths do not require the use of extraordinary means to prolong the act of dying. Long-held principles of the Republican Party were abandoned in an effort to appease religious conservatives.